Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1997 comedy sequel, Home Alone 3. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I would like to give a special shout out to Zach for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you'd like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. A link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, Home Alone 3, it's one of those films that, in all honesty, I've never been a big fan of. Even when I saw it when I was a kid, I thought it was lame. And I saw it later when I was an adult. I still thought it was pretty bad. And then I rewatched it again for the purpose of this review. And I still wasn't really that big of a fan of it. I'm not going to say that it's completely awful, but that's not saying much. Yeah, it's not as trash as the Home Alone sequels that would come out after this. I still wouldn't call this a good movie or some kind of underrated gem. It's tonally wildly uneven. It's nowhere near as funny or as charming or as unique as the first two Home Alone films. It barely has, it's not barely, it has no connection whatsoever to the first two movies. It is one of those films that's a sequel in name only, and just feels like it was just some kind of attempt to actually do a remake or a reboot with the third film before the rebootquel was actually a popular thing. So that doesn't really do it any favors either. So it makes it come across as just a poor imitation of Home Alone. Now, it's directed by Raja Gosnell, and Raja Gosnell, this is his directorial debut. He worked with Chris Columbus and John Hughes before. I think he was either, I think he might have been an editor for the first Home Alone or the second one, or he was at least involved with the production in some capacity. And originally, John Hughes was trying to get Chris Columbus to return to direct, but Chris Columbus just decided that he didn't really want to be involved with this project because he didn't really want to do any more Home Alone movies. And honestly, after the second film, which was already starting to show signs of things getting a bit derivative, I can see why he was like, nah, hard pass. But he did suggest Raja Gosnell because Home Alone was his first film, and so he felt like a first-time director might be a good idea for this movie. Maybe you could capture some of the same magic that Home Alone did with its first-time director with Chris Columbus. And I see the reasoning, and in all honesty, Raja Gosnell's direction isn't really that bad. It's just very average. It's nothing that impressive. It's nothing that technically skilled. It's just serviceable. And it definitely lacks when it comes to the comic timing and the way that the slapstick is shot. It just doesn't have that same punch to it that the slapstick scenes in the first two films had. It definitely comes across like there's just a lot less energy, despite the fact that there's a lot of wild and sort of crazy stuff going on in terms of the pratfalls and the traps. It just doesn't really have that same impact that the first two films had, especially when it comes to the characters getting hit with blunt force or with various objects or falling to the ground or all that kind of stuff. It just doesn't really have that same punch that the first two Home Alone films had when it comes to those kind of sequences. And when it comes to some of the other smaller scenes that are just dealing with the home life of the kid and his siblings, or what's going on with the parents. It also doesn't really have anything that really makes it stand out. It's just kind of just there. Visually, it's lively enough at times, but there are moments where it's a bit flat. So it's one of those things where the direction is not going to win any awards, but for first time director, it could have been a lot worse. It could have been a genuine disaster. And I don't really feel that that was the case here. I think Raja did an okay job with it, with this film, directing wise, in terms of his camera techniques and his angles and using some zooms and different sort of stuff. But you could tell that this was the work of a guy who was still trying to learn the ropes. And in all honesty, Raja Gosnell, even after this, I think he did a little bit better job with Scooby-Doo, the Scooby-Doo films, but he never really turned into a director on the same level as Chris Columbus. And it just is one of those things where I don't think he really evolved that much past his first effort here with Home Alone 3. The script is by John Hughes, and I know there were a bunch of different concepts and ideas that John initially had in mind for Home Alone 3. One of them was a film dealing with teenage Kevin McAllister, with Macaulay Culkin reprising his role. Another one was with a different kid, which I think was supposed to be Fuller. It was going to be Fuller, the kid who drank all the Pepsi and wets the bed. He was going to be the lead. It was going to, and John Hughes wanted Kieran Culkin to reprise his role and take over the mantle, so to speak, from his brother Macaulay. And it was going to be about Fuller, and then his parents were going to leave, and then he was going to be home alone, and then he was going to have to fend off Harry and Marv. But Kieran Culkin didn't really want that kind of pressure, and so he passed on it. And that led to John Hughes just completely scrapping that idea and just starting from the base level, and ultimately wound up with this script. And this was the last script that he wrote for Fox, for his deal that he made with Fox after, I believe, after Home Alone. He made like a 5 film deal. And this is definitely one of the weaker films. Like, honestly, something like Baby's Day Out, even though that doesn't get a ton of critical accolades, and it didn't do that well when it came out, I think that's a better movie than Home Alone 3. And I think it's a funnier comedy as well. And I do think it's a better script. Like, John Hughes is just phoning it in here. It's one of those screenplays where when you see John Hughes' name on it, you're like, huh? Like, you're kind of surprised. You're kind of taken aback a little bit, because this isn't really anything that you would necessarily look at as a typical John Hughes script. This was John Hughes just phoning it in because he's contractually obligated to write this. That's what this was. And here's one of the main issues I have with this script. It's way off in terms of its tone. From the very beginning, it's like this super serious spy espionage thriller kind of thing about these group of spies / criminals who trying to steal a computer chip. They successfully get the chip, and they hide it in a toy car, but then there's a mix-up with the toy car at an airport, and the toy car winds up going with this older lady to somewhere in Chicago. The old lady then gives the toy car to this kid who is the new Kevin McAllister. And throughout the script, there's just these really wild, uneven tonal inconsistencies involving these spies and these criminals. It plays it straight with them for like half the script, And then when it comes to them having to face off against a kid and deal with all the traps, now they're a bunch of bumbling fools. It doesn't work. I understand what they were trying to, I understand what John Hughes is trying to do with this, but it does not work. In the first two films, Harry and Marv, they were established as bumbling crooks. They were crooks, they were robbers, but they weren't particularly good at robbing. So them being outsmarted and outwitted by a kid wasn't really that much of a stretch. Here, it's a massive stretch that this team of accomplished veteran spies slash criminals who successfully stole this computer chip they were able to do that. They're not able to outsmart a kid and a parrot and a rat. You know, it's just it's really stretching things, and it really makes things even more incredulous when it comes to this concept of, you know, the kid going up against the burglars and defending his house and so on. It also doesn't help that for the first hour or so, there's not really a lot that's happening. There's multiple false alarm moments with the kid calling the cops because he sees some burglars. I think that's trying to make you sympathetic towards the kid, but it doesn't really work. It just feels like Hughes is just padding the script. There's moments where it literally is just Home Alone, but nowhere near as good or as endearing. Like random scenes with the siblings being mean to Alex D. Linz's character, Alex. So the siblings being mean to their brother, just like the siblings or the relatives are mean to Kevin, but this just comes across as is forced, and we have to have it in there because it's a Home Alone movie. The stuff with Alex and his mom and what's going on with her also feels like it's a retread of what you saw with Kevin and his mom. Even the whole chickenpox thing, like, okay, he has chickenpox, but it doesn't even seem like he's sick at all. It doesn't seem like it really factors into anything other than like a bit of a gag at the end with the burglars getting chickenpox. Because other than that, like, he's not that sick. They say he has a fever, but he sure doesn't act like it. So he seems like he's perfectly healthy and perfectly fine. So with the mom being like overprotective and constantly checking in on him and feeling bad about going to work because her kid has chickenpox, it just doesn't really fit that well because of the fact that it doesn't really seem like he's that sick. And speaking of other things that don't fit well, there's a lot of comedy in this that is just either not funny or just awkward. Like the whole thing about, oh, Alex slammed the toilet seat on his thing again, or a lot of references to butts and all this other stuff. It just felt like it was really lowbrow, even for Home Alone. And that's what you get for the majority of like the first hour. You get what definitely feels like hand-me-down characters that are not Kevin's mom, but might as well be something along those lines, or Kevin's siblings, and if not Kevin and Alex, try to do something with him to make him a little bit more unique by having him be a little bit more of a whiz kid in terms of, you know, tech and stuff, and using a remote control that is long distance so it can change the channel on the neighbor's TV, which stuff like that I kind of didn't mind. Even him having the rat definitely did help him stand out a little bit and not feel like it's just Kevin McAllister, but this is like a different kid. But because of the fact that it's Home Alone 3, like, it's hard not to think about that while you're watching the movie. There's a long sequence that goes on forever with this toy car where Alex puts a video camera on it and is driving around the neighborhood, goes into a house trying to get footage of the burglar. The burglar sees it, tries to get it, doesn't succeed, but then eventually the burglar, and his team managed to get the toy car. Things like, it seems like, oh no, all right, it's over. Like, he's not going to be able to find a way out of this one. And he still manages to somehow get the toy car back. But that's how they know that Alex is at this house and the toy car is there with the chip. And so that sets things up for the last 30 minutes or so of the film that involve the pratfalls and the slapstick and the traps. I'll give the film this. The trap setting up scene I thought was really well done. I felt that it was well written. I thought it was well executed. I really liked the Oingo Boingo song that they used for that sequence, Home Again. And there is a nice variety of traps. They are, for the most part, different enough from the kind of traps that you saw Kevin employ or utilize in the first two Home Alone films. Although there are some of them that are really lazy. Like, there's one where one guy is just struggling with a hose. I was like, really? A garden hose? But it's cold outside. So what? It's a freaking hose. Like, that is really lame. Like, this guy's struggling with a hose? You couldn't come up with something better than that, John Hughes? That really comes across like he was just completely just not really into this script and was just doing it for the money, or whatever. This guy struggles with a hose, and you get the typical sort of stuff that you saw in the first two Home Alone films, where the traps are like should be deadly, but the criminals somehow survive. And there's some stuff that I do like with those traps. Like, I like the whole trampoline that's frozen over. I like that bit. I like the moments with the girl where she's going through the glue and then the mud and then keeps getting hit in the head with these flower pots. I like the moments where the characters get electrocuted. I like the different sort of gadgets that Alex utilizes and uses when it comes to uh, uh, taking out these criminals. I know a lot of people like the song "Ring the Bell." I'm not a super big fan of that song. It just, it's just like a song that just doesn't fit with this film to me. Like, the lyrics are especially just off, in my opinion. I think it's called My Town by Cartoon Boyfriend. I think that's what it is. And yeah, that's a whole thing. It's like, if you want to raise hell, then ring the bell. Like, it just doesn't really fit for a kids movie. And also that might have fit better with the Macaulay Culkin Home Alone movie, but with this one, with like a 10-year-old kid and his traps that are just they're creative and fun enough, but they're also not really necessarily that memorable. See, that's the thing. The traps aren't anywhere near as memorable as the traps in the first two. Even something as simple as a toolbox falling down the stairs, that just had much more of an impact than like one of the guys getting his feet stuck in glue and Mega Bloks containers and sliding around and falling down the stairs, or the girl falling down the dumbwaiter, and some of this other stuff. And you have a moment at the end that I felt was like, really, where the bad guy, the leader of the group of criminals, seems like he gets away because Alex does enough to incapacitate the rest of his crew, so they get arrested by the police and the FBI, and he gives the chip to the FBI agent. But the FBI agent laments that he didn't catch the main guy because he's been trying to catch him for 7 years. And then the parrot, the bird, finds where the guy is, and I guess Alex set this up where there's this igloo for him to hide in that has a trap in it where if you light a match, and then it causes all the fireworks to explode and signals where he is. And I was just like, that's really stretching things. Like that's pretty that's a bit too much. Like, why the heck would he just decide to hide in an igloo in the first place? When did Alice have the time to even put that together? Like, it felt very strained, and it wasn't really that satisfying because it just happened off screen when it comes to the guy's capture. And there's just a lot of stuff like that in this where it's just not anywhere near as satisfying or as funny or as clever as the first two Home Alone films. Even Home Alone 2, which had its derivative elements, it still managed to be clever and witty and entertaining and endearing with the stuff involving the toy store, the Mr. Duncan, the toy store owner, and the bird lady. There were things like that really, helped it still feel like it's somewhat of a different movie. And of course the different setting, which is in New York. This is yet again in Chicago. And it's not supposed to take place on Christmas, but there's still Christmas decorations that you see throughout the movie, and there's even a scene that features a Christmas song. So I'm like, if this is not supposed to be a Christmas film, why are there wreaths on the door? Why is there a Christmas song playing in one scene? The reason why it's there is because it's Home Alone, and Home Alone are Christmas movies, so we have to have like some Christmas stuff. Even if it doesn't necessarily fit, and even if it's not necessarily what the film was trying to do, it still needs to be there because it's Home Alone. That felt like a studio mandated thing. Like, we got to have that Christmas music because it's a Home Alone movie. Can't have a Home Alone movie without Christmas music. And there are some things that the script does that is a bit of a change up when it comes to what you saw in the first two Home Alone films. Like the stuff with Mrs. Hess, where she's left to die, being tied up in this shed, and the doors open and she's freezing to death, and Alex comes in and saves her and warms her up and unties her and takes her back to her house or to his place. That was a nice change of pace and a nice way to switch things up, because in the previous two films you had the older person who would come in and help Kevin, but here it's the kid that's helping the older person. But that whole subplot still had an issue, because I just didn't buy Mrs. Hess's transition from being a grouchy old witch to then, oh, you're a nice kid and blah 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 blah, and you're cool, and I like being with you, and I like being with your family. That just felt like a stretch. And comedy wise, it's so much more kiddified. Like, it's so much more juvenile than the comedy in the first two. Like, there were some gags and some moments in those that were, you could argue, were geared more towards adults than to kids. You got stuff like, you hit my winky, which was another scene that just felt like it was a really lame wannabe version of a scene in the original Home Alone with the tarantula and the crowbar, but this time around it's a rat in the guy's pants, and then he gets hit in the crotch. And there's just a lot of stuff like that where you're just like, this just feels like it's just trying to recycle and just replay the same beats of the first one or the second movie at times, but not nearly as good. And that's never a good sign when you're watching a sequel and it's actively doing moments where it's derivative of the other films, and it's doing it in a way that is actually considerably worse. I will give the script this. There are some moments of adult comedy that kind of surprised me. Like there's a line with the parrot where he looks at a poster of a woman in a bikini and is all like, "There's no way that those are real. Like if those are real, then I'm an eagle." Like that cracked me up a little bit. And there were a couple moments like that where I was like, okay, there's a bit of that edge that the first two Home Alone films had, but that's very few and far between. Most of the time, that edge is completely gone. And the siblings and their whole thing, the moment where they stand up for their brother at the end was not believable at all. And there's just a lot of stuff in this script that it just is not good. It's not a good screenplay. And it's just one of those things where it's a prime example of how you can't just recreate the success or the formula of Home Alone 1 and 2 without key elements like Macaulay Culkin or Joe Pesci or Daniel Stern. Like you can't, or Chris Columbus or stuff. Those elements are irreplaceable. You can't just come in and get a different director and a different kid who's got some charm and a little bit of charisma and a new group of criminals and some new traps and have the same amount of success. Unless you're Roger Ebert, who apparently never liked the first two anyway and loved this one. So much so that he surprised Gene Siskel so much he almost fell out of his chair during the review of this movie. But other than Roger Ebert, like for the most part, a lot of critics saw that and they were like, "Yeah, this isn't recreating the formula as successfully as the previous two films." The cast, Alex D. Linz, I actually think is not that bad. He was given a really tough task to fill the shoes of Macaulay Culkin in his prime, which I think is honestly a nearly impossible task to pull off. And he still manages to, you know, be one of the decent or at least tolerable aspects of the movie. Like, he's not great, but I thought he was okay. He was a decent enough lead for the film. There were some moments of this line delivery where I think it worked. He showed a semblance of acting talent in terms of being able to showcase the different kinds of emotions. I don't think he was as bad as some people made him out to be, especially when it comes to the rest of the kids who tried to fill Kevin's shoes later on in this franchise. And he would show that talent again in something like Max Keeble's Big Move, which I actually think he was quite good in. But here he's fine. But, you know, I think a lot of the reasons why he's not better than fine is really due to the script. Maybe get somebody other than John Hughes who's just phoning it in to write this. Maybe that might have helped. Haviland Morris is the mom. She's just meh. She's just there. There's not really a whole lot for her to do. Same thing for Kevin Kilner as Jack, Alex's dad. Olek Kruppa as Peter, the leader of the International Criminals. Araya Kihlstedt as Alice. Lenny Von Dohlen is Burton Jernigan. Just kind of there. David Thornton is Earl Unger. Honestly, I think he was the best. He was the funniest one out of the group. He had the best physical comedy moments. He had honestly had some of the funniest lines, like the whole bit where he's all like, I'm tired of this. How about we just find all the kids in the neighborhood and just kill them all and be done with it. Like, the fact that he was just so that ruthless was actually something that was kind of funny to me. Uh, I also give Raya Kihlstedt some credit for her physical comedy attributes as well in this. Lenny von Dohlen, nah, not so much. And Olek Kruppa, he he had a bit of menace to him. I will give him that. You bought him as a leader of this group of international criminals, but when it comes to him like doing the pratfalls with the spray paint on his eyes and getting outsmarted by a parrot, like it just didn't really click, and I didn't really feel that he was necessarily the right actor. You needed an actor who could actually have a little bit more fun with it, not play it so seriously. If you're gonna try, have this kind of tone with the film. You also have a very young Scarlett Johansson, who I think this might have been her debut as Molly, Alex's older sister. You also have Seth Smith as Stan, who's the older brother, who clearly is some kind of attempt to be like Buzz, but the discount store version. You've got Marian Seldes as Mrs. Hess. Christopher Curry, who was in Chud. He's also just kind of there as the FBI agent Stucky, who's trying to find Beaupre. And there's a few other actors and actresses, but not really anyone to really that's worth mentioning. What, the random unnamed mob boss played by James Saito? Can't really say a whole lot about that performance. He answered the phone. He made some phone calls in front of a fish tank. The cinematography by Julio Macat, it's meh. The editing by Bruce Green and Malcolm Campbell is very mid. The music by Nick Lenny Smith. There are some pieces when it comes to the score that I really liked. Some of the electric guitar moments in particular. But the moments where it's just recycling bits of the score from the original or the first film, that really, I didn't care for that. It just felt like a really lame remix. But there were some parts of the score that I didn't mind. This cost $32 million. I don't know why. This looked like it cost $10 million, $5 million. This did not look like a $32 million production. It honestly looked considerably cheaper than the first two films. And it's not as well paced as the first two, especially the first film. Like, it wasn't as engaged with the whole kid at home with chicken pox thing, because it never really felt like, okay, this kid is in any sort of situation where he was really in a significantly bad spot. Like with Kevin, when his parents left him home alone, they went on vacation out of state and they were gone and he was by himself. This kid, yeah, he was by himself and he was sick with the chicken pox, but his parents were like a phone call away. They showed up in and out throughout the movie. So, that didn't really feel like it was a genuine Home Alone movie in that instance then. It was like Home Alone in name only, in a multitude of different ways. That's really honestly the best way to describe this film. It really did feel like it was just trying to be a Home Alone inspired movie, and maybe it might have been better off if it wasn't a part of the Home Alone franchise. Maybe it could have done things a little bit more differently, and also it probably would have gotten a lot less critical derision because of that. I still think it would not have worked that well if you're just going off of what you have here with this script and with the other elements that the film has to offer. But I definitely do feel that it would be less divisive, so to speak. It would just be one of those things where I don't think you'd have a lot of people hating it, but they would just be like, yeah, that was somewhat tolerable and just another below average, forgettable kids movie, but nothing that would really have a ton of vitriol associated with it. But Anyway, that's just my thoughts on Home Alone 3. And until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.